going to have another conversation with another great guest, also from the nation. Elie Mystal joins us. He's a justice correspondent. That's a title I always love. What do you do for a living? Oh, not a big deal. I'm just a justice correspondent. Correspondent for justice.
In the Republican era, it's more like we're correspondent for injustice.
Yeah, well, that's true. That's true. By the way, you can tell I love that name because I'm the one who picked the name Justice Democrats. So I'm all about that. Elie, we let's talk a little bit about that injustice during this Republican reign. First of all, let's start super broad. The Republicans are obsessed with the courts. I talked to someone who covers evangelical Christians and Christian nationalism yesterday on the show, and there's a reason why they want to pack the courts, but there's actually a couple of reasons. Tell us, broadly speaking, and the Democrats unfortunately don't focus on this that much, but why are the Republicans so laser focused on the courts more than anything else?
Yeah, and look, Mitch McConnell does not go around stealing branches of government for nothing. And one of the things that we've seen now that they have a solid conservative majority on the courts is that they are using the Supreme Court and the lower federal courts as kind of the enforcement branch to push through the rest of the Republican agenda, especially the parts of the agenda that are kind of wildly unpopular, right? The stuff that is difficult for them to get passed at the ballot box. They're using the courts to kind of enforce Republican rule and the Republican agenda. We see that most clearly these days around the issues of voting rights. Kind of Republicans generally, even the president, who doesn't understand much, understands that if everybody voted and if everybody's votes counted equally, then Republicans would not be viable in national elections and many state elections. So the Republicans use the courts to suppress the vote, contract the vote, gerrymander the vote, and the courts uphold that again and again and again and again. That's a big thing. Obviously, Republicans are kind of antithetical to minority rights and women's rights and gay rights. Republican courts are doing a lot of that work for them as well. And there's always the gun thing, which Republican courts are generally very pro-gun, very anti-gun regulation. So all of this kind of stealing of the courts is so they can get these policies passed. And I say to Democrats who aren't always focused on the courts, name me an issue that you care about. Anything. Take guns, take the environment, name me an issue you care about. I will directly show you how the Supreme Court and losing control of the Supreme Court will frustrate that issue for the next 30 years.
We know, and that's the conversation I had yesterday on the program, that they use abortion as a way to trick religious people in this country to vote for Republicans. And then they pass tax cuts and deregulation, and it's all in service of big business and corporate interests, et cetera. But actually, as you were explaining that phenomenon, I thought, it might be that they also use abortion to get Republican voters to care so much about judges. But the real goal is not necessarily abortion or even the Second Amendment. The real goal is, they knew, Paul Weyrich said it back in 1980, they knew they were never going to win elections in the long run in this country if everybody voted. He's the guy who founded the Heritage Foundation and so many other right-wing think tanks. He's the right-wing godfather.
I think it all really does devolve to voting rights, and I'm including gerrymandering within that kind of suite of rights that Republican politicians are obsessed with. And I think you're absolutely right that they use abortion. Abortion is the thin end of the wedge. They think people act like abortion is the fat end. It's the thin end. It's the one to get under it, because even Republicans wouldn't support judges who kind of explicitly say, well, I'm not going to let people vote, because they never know if those people might be them. So they support judges on this kind of general anti-abortion rhetoric, and it's those same judges who become the judges to suppress voting rights throughout the country. So when you look at kind of what the court's doing right now during the virus, their decision in the Wisconsin voting rights case becomes, one of the most obvious examples of how Republicans are using the courts to manipulate the vote. putting people in Wisconsin in the situation where it was not vote or die, it was vote and die. That if you wanted to exercise your franchise in Wisconsin during this primary, you had to literally be willing to risk your life. That was a Republican idea. And it's the judges who are kind of lifted up on the wings of the anti-abortion crowd who then get to do these, get to make these decisions to put the very franchise at risk for millions.
Look, I think Roe v. Wade is fantastic policy. If I was a legislator, it's exactly what I would pass. And you should know that historically, I've been conservative judicially, and I didn't think it was the right decision because I don't think that was in the Constitution. But put that aside, as a matter of politics, did Roe v. Wade really set the Democratic Party back a long way? Because it allowed them to use a weapon like this to capture 35% of the country and have them vote maniacally and unquestioningly for the Republican Party for the last 40 years.
I think the failure is not the fact that Roe v. Wade happened and this gave Republicans a wedge issue. I think the failure is that Democrats have refused to throatily and chestily and full force defend Roe v. Wade and defend a woman's right to choose for over 40 years. The Democratic Party is still fundamentally locked in the abortion should be safe, legal, and rare stuff, as opposed to kind of vociferously defending the right of a woman to have autonomy over her own body. I do not think that this is a particularly close case or a particularly close issue. If you wanted me to say something controversial, it would go something like this. The Constitution does not give the state any right to do anything about anybody's body until after the baby is outside the mother's womb. Boom. Abortion should be legal up to 8 months and 3.5 days. Like, you could go that far for me constitutionally to set the edge and then say, but with things like Roe v. Wade and Casey and Planned Parenthood v. Casey, we've come up with a compromise solution that still fundamentally protects a woman's right to choose, but also allows for a compelling state interest and blah, 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 whatever. That would be a truly aggressive, progressive stand that we could have had for the past 30 years. But instead, for the past 30 or 40 years, we've acted like, oh, abortion, ew. I mean, I guess we have to sometimes let women control, but like only in the maximal work. Like that is, to me, what the failure is. We have this decision and we've failed to defend it properly. And that is what has allowed the Republican zeitgeist around this issue to gain so much power and so much steam.
So whether it's constitutional or not, it is the wish of the 70% of the country. It is a wish of a higher percentage of women, and it's definitely about your freedom. It's about your liberty. And the great trick that the Republicans played is that they captured religious people in this country, and the Democrats ceded that ground, and they should have never ever ceded that ground. The reality is the Bible is pro-abortion. It just is. It's in Numbers. It says if your wife cheats on you, you should give her a toxic potion. And if she cheated, she'll have an abortion, and that'll be great, and God will be really happy. So you should look it up. That's a fact. But Democrats are too afraid. That they've been afraid of Republicans my entire life, and it's just sickening. And yeah, go ahead, Ellie. Just last thought here.
I also just think that the ground that was truly ceded with the religious right wasn't even over the abortion issue. It was over the poverty issue. Like, I was raised Catholic. I've done the catechisms. There is no religion pretty much on this planet that I am aware of that espouses the Republican kind of cruelty and dismissiveness towards the poor and the sick and the weak, and ceding that ground to Republicans with their prosperity gospels and their whatever has really been the failure. I think that ground was ceded so much because of racial issues, because so many of these so-called Christian conservatives and so-called religious conservatives find it okay to deny services as simple as food and medical care to Black and brown communities in this country. And it's because of that. Again, if I'm going to criticize the Democrats for being unwilling to fight, that's where I'm going to criticize the fight, right? Like, fight for the poor racial minorities just as vociferously as you might fight for poor rural white minorities. Losing Christians to that racism, to me, is where the failure is.
And fight for the poor, the needy, minorities as vociferously as Jesus would have done. It's not too much to ask for. Right.
I would agree.
Right. Ellie Mistal, Justice Correspondent for The Nation. You're awesome. Thank you for joining us. We appreciate it.
Thank you so much, Cenk.
On the go? Don't worry, we got you covered. You can still listen to TYT at our new podcast network. Find us on Apple Podcasts, the Google Play Store, or at tyt.com/podcast.